The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Aldoria Palace as King Edmund stood at his office window, watching the gardens below. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he gripped his morning tea, steam rising like the uncertainty that had settled over the kingdom in recent months. At 72, the weight of the crown felt heavier than ever, especially with the challenges his family now faced. The headlines from that morning's newspapers lay scattered across his mahogany desk, each one more troubling than the last. Queen Margot's health concerns continue, read one. Royal family in crisis, proclaimed another. But it was the smaller headline that caught his attention most. Princess Isabella steps up as palace source of strength. Edmund's thoughts drifted to his daughter-in-law, Princess Isabella, who had married his eldest son, Prince Alexander, 5 years ago. What started as a fairy tale wedding had evolved into something far more profound. Isabella had transformed from a nervous young woman thrust into royal life into the steady heartbeat of the monarchy. Her genuine warmth and dedication to charitable causes had won over not just the people of Aldoria, but Edmund's own heart as well. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Your Majesty," came the voice of his private secretary, "Princess Isabella has arrived for your meeting." Edmund straightened his tie and walked to his desk. "Please send her in." Isabella entered with her characteristic grace, wearing a simple navy dress that somehow managed to look both elegant and approachable. Her smile was warm, but Edmund could see the concern in her eyes. The past few months had been difficult for everyone in the family, but Isabella had shouldered much of the burden with remarkable composure. "Good morning, Uncle Edmund," she said, using the affectionate title she had adopted shortly after joining the family. She approached and gave him a gentle kiss on the cheek, a gesture that never failed to remind him of the daughter he had always wished for. "My dear Isabella," Edmund replied, gesturing to the comfortable chairs by the fireplace rather than the formal seating area. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." As they settled into their chairs, Edmund noticed how Isabella's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, a sure sign she was nervous. "I wanted to speak with you about the upcoming state visit from the Prime Minister of Noveria," he began. "With Margot's situation, I was hoping you might consider taking on additional responsibilities." Isabella nodded thoughtfully. "Of course, Uncle Edmund. Whatever the family needs." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "How is Aunt Margot feeling today?" The question hung in the air like a delicate piece of crystal, beautiful but fragile. Queen Margot's gradual withdrawal from public life had been attributed to health concerns, but those close to the family knew the truth was more complex. The constant scrutiny, the endless criticism, and the pressure of royal life had taken their toll on the woman who had been Edmund's companion through his most challenging years as king. "She had breakfast in her chambers this morning," Edmund said quietly. "The doctors say she needs rest, time away from all of this." He gestured vaguely toward the window, beyond which lay the world that watched their every move. Isabella leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm. "She's been through so much, Uncle Edmund. The press has been particularly harsh lately. Perhaps some time away from official duties would be beneficial for everyone." Edmund studied his daughter-in-law's face, recognizing the wisdom in her words. At 31, Isabella possessed an emotional intelligence that often surpassed those twice her age. She had an uncanny ability to see beyond the immediate crisis to the human heart of every situation. "The people love you, Isabella," Edmund said suddenly. "More than that, they trust you. They see in you something authentic, something real in a world that often feels artificial." A blush crept across Isabella's cheeks. "I'm just trying to do my duty, Uncle Edmund, to serve the people of Aldoria the best way I can. And that's exactly why they love you," Edmund replied. "You don't see it as a performance. You see it as service." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Outside, the sounds of the palace coming to life drifted through the windows. Staff preparing for the day, gardeners tending to the grounds, the distant sound of tour groups being led through the public areas. "I've been thinking," Isabella said finally, "about ways we might modernize some of our charitable initiatives. The youth programs especially. There are so many young people in Aldoria who feel disconnected, who need to know that their monarchy cares about their futures." Edmund's eyes lit up. This was why he had grown to rely on Isabella so heavily. While others focused on protocol and tradition, She thought about impact and connection. Tell me more about your ideas. For the next hour, they discussed Isabella's vision for expanded outreach programs, her plans for visiting schools in underserved communities, and her desire to use technology to better connect with the younger generation of Aldorians. Edmund found himself energized by her enthusiasm, reminded of why he had fallen in love with public service all those years ago. As their meeting drew to a close, Isabella stood and smoothed her dress. Uncle Edmund, I want you to know that whatever challenges we face as a family, Alexander and I are here to support you. The monarchy will endure because it serves something greater than itself. Edmund rose as well, feeling a surge of emotion he hadn't expected. In a moment of spontaneity, he reached out and took Isabella's hand. My dear, you have become the light of this family. Your strength gives me hope for the future of Aldoria. Isabella squeezed his hand gently. We're all in this together, Uncle Edmund. That's what family means. As she left his office, Edmund returned to the window, but this time the view looked different. The challenges hadn't disappeared, but somehow they seemed more manageable. In Isabella, he had found not just a capable partner in royal duties, but a reminder of why the monarchy mattered in the first place. She represented the bridge between tradition and progress, between duty and heart. The day ahead would bring its own challenges, but for the first time in months, King Edmund felt ready to face them. 3 weeks after her conversation with King Edmund, Princess Isabella found herself standing in the grand ballroom of Aldoria Palace, surrounded by diplomats, government officials, and members of the international press. The state dinner for the Novarian delegation was in full swing, and for the first time in months, Isabella was serving as the primary royal hostess alongside the king. Queen Margot's absence was notable, but had been carefully explained to the media as a temporary withdrawal due to health concerns. The palace communications team had crafted a message that was both truthful and protective, emphasizing the queen's need for rest while maintaining the dignity of the crown. Isabella moved gracefully through the crowd, switching effortlessly between 3 languages as she engaged with guests. Her emerald green gown, a stunning creation by Aldoria's most celebrated designer, caught the light from the crystal chandeliers as she laughed warmly at something the Novarian ambassador's wife had said. From across the room, King Edmund watched with obvious pride. His own conversations with the Prime Minister of Novaria had gone exceptionally well, largely due to the groundwork Isabella had laid during her private meetings with the delegation earlier that week. She had studied every briefing document, memorized the names and interests of each delegation member, and prepared thoughtful questions about Novarian culture and current affairs. Your daughter-in-law is quite remarkable, commented Lord Harrison, Aldoria's foreign secretary, as he joined Edmund near the orchestra area. The Novarians are completely charmed. Prime Minister Valdez told me he's never felt more welcomed by a royal family. Edmund nodded, his eyes never leaving Isabella as she guided the ambassador's young daughter to meet the palace's head chef, who was delighted to explain how the evening's dessert had been prepared. She has a gift for making people feel seen and valued, Edmund replied. It's not something that can be taught. The evening progressed beautifully, with Isabella delivering a short but heartfelt speech about the friendship between Aldoria and Novaria. Her words were carefully chosen but felt spontaneous, and she managed to include personal anecdotes about her own visits to Novarian cultural sites. The applause was genuine and enthusiastic. Later, as the last guests departed, Isabella found herself alone with Edmund in his private study. She had kicked off her formal shoes and was rubbing her feet, a gesture so natural and unguarded that it reminded Edmund of his late mother, who had possessed the same ability to be both regal and utterly human. You were magnificent tonight, Edmund said, pouring himself a small brandy. I received at least a dozen compliments about your grace and intelligence. Isabella smiled, but Edmund could see the exhaustion behind her eyes. Taking on additional royal duties while maintaining her existing charitable commitments had stretched her thin, though she would never complain. It felt good to be useful, she admitted, though I confess I kept thinking about Aunt Margot and wishing she could have been there to see the beautiful flower arrangements. She has such an eye for those details. The mention of his wife brought a shadow across Edmund's face. Margot had chosen to have dinner in her private chambers, claiming a headache, but they both knew the real reason. The prospect of facing the diplomatic crowd, the questions about her reduced schedule, and the inevitable comparisons to Isabella's rising prominence had become too overwhelming. "She's proud of you, you know," Edmund said quietly. "She may not say it often, but she recognizes how much you've sacrificed to help our family through this difficult time." Isabella looked up sharply. "I haven't sacrificed anything, Uncle Edmund. This is my family too. When I married Alexander, I committed to all of this, the wonderful parts and the challenging ones." Her conviction was so strong, so genuine, that Edmund felt his chest tighten with emotion. At that moment, Prince Alexander appeared in the doorway, having returned from his own official engagement in the northern provinces. "I heard tonight was a tremendous success," Alexander said, approaching his wife and placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The early reports from the embassy are glowing." Isabella leaned into her husband's touch, and Edmund was struck by the quiet strength of their partnership. Alexander, while a capable and dedicated heir, had always been more comfortable with the ceremonial aspects of royal life. Isabella's emergence as a dynamic public figure had created a powerful complement to his steadier approach. "Your wife has become indispensable," Edmund told his son. "Tonight proved that she can handle any diplomatic challenge we might face." Alexander beamed with pride. "She's been preparing for weeks. I found her in the library at midnight 3 days ago, reading historical accounts of Novarian-Aldorian trade relations from the 1800s. Isabella laughed. "I wanted to make sure I understood the full context of our relationship with Novaria. You can't build authentic connections without understanding history." This attention to detail, this commitment to excellence, had become Isabella's trademark. Whether visiting children's hospitals, meeting with agricultural leaders, or representing Aldoria at international events, she approached every task with the same thorough preparation and genuine care. "The people have noticed the changes," Alexander continued. "My assistant showed me some of the social media responses from tonight's event. The hashtag Princess Isabella Shines is trending across the kingdom." Edmund raised an eyebrow. Social media had always been somewhat mysterious to him, but he understood its importance in modern royal communication. The fact that Isabella had managed to generate such positive public engagement during a time of family uncertainty spoke volumes about her instinctive understanding of public sentiment. "Tomorrow's schedule includes 3 appearances," Isabella said, consulting her phone. "The children's hospital visit, the veterans luncheon, and the university fundraiser. I've prepared remarks for each, but I want to make sure I have time for personal conversations too." Edmund marveled at her energy. At her age, he had been far less confident about public speaking and had relied heavily on prepared scripts. Isabella, however, seemed to thrive on the spontaneous moments, the unexpected questions, and the human connections that made royal engagements meaningful. As the 3 of them prepared to retire for the evening, Edmund reflected on how dramatically the palace atmosphere had changed in recent weeks. Where there had once been tension and uncertainty, Isabella's presence had brought a sense of purpose and optimism. She had become the steady center around which the royal family could reorganize itself. "Isabella," Edmund said as she reached the doorway, "tomorrow I'd like to discuss expanding your role permanently, not just as a temporary measure, but as a recognition of your unique gifts." Isabella paused, considering his words carefully. "I'm honored by your confidence, Uncle Edmund. Let's talk about how we can best serve Aldoria." As she and Alexander disappeared down the corridor, Edmund remained in his study, feeling hopeful about the future for the first time in months. Queen Margot stood at the window of her private sitting room, watching the morning routine unfold in the palace gardens below. Gardeners moved between flower beds with practiced efficiency, their movements creating a ballet of purpose and care that had once brought her great comfort. Now even this simple pleasure felt complicated by the weight of her own isolation. At 58, Margot had spent the last 15 years as Edmund's queen, a role she had never quite expected to fill. When she married the then-divorced King Edmund, she had been a successful art gallery owner with her own independent life. The transition to royal duties had been challenging but manageable, helped by Edmund's unwavering support and the gradual acceptance of the Aldorian people. But somewhere along the way, the constant scrutiny had begun to wear away at her confidence like water on stone. Every outfit choice was analyzed, every public appearance dissected, every facial expression interpreted as evidence of her fitness for the role. The criticism that had once rolled off her back now seemed to penetrate deeper, each negative comment adding to a growing sense of inadequacy. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting her lady-in-waiting with the morning's correspondence. Instead, Princess Isabella entered, carrying a tea tray and wearing a gentle smile. "Good morning, Aunt Margot. I thought you might enjoy some company with your morning tea." Margot felt a complex mix of emotions at Isabella's presence. On one hand, she genuinely loved her daughter-in-law and admired the young woman's natural grace and dedication. On the other hand, Isabella's rising prominence served as a constant reminder of her own retreat from public life. "How thoughtful, dear," Margot replied, gesturing to the small table by the window. "Please sit. Tell me about last night's dinner. I heard it was quite successful." Isabella poured tea with practiced elegance, a skill she had perfected during her early months in the palace. "It went well, though I kept wishing you were there. Your experience with diplomatic entertaining would have been invaluable." The comment was meant kindly, but it touched on exactly what Margot had been struggling with. Once she had been Edmund's trusted partner in such events, known for her ability to make even the most intimidating dignitaries feel at ease. Now the thought of facing such scrutiny felt overwhelming. "I'm sure you managed beautifully," Margot said, and she meant it. Isabella's success wasn't something to resent. It was something to celebrate. Yet the celebration felt bittersweet when it highlighted her own withdrawal. Isabella studied Margot's face with the perceptive eye that had made her so effective in royal life. "Aunt Margot, may I speak honestly with you?" Margot nodded, curious about what Isabella might say. "I know the press has been particularly harsh lately, and I understand why you might want to step back, but I also want you to know that your experience and wisdom are invaluable to this family. There are aspects of royal life that I'm still learning, and I would benefit greatly from your guidance." The young woman's sincerity was evident, and Margot felt a stirring of something she hadn't experienced in weeks: usefulness. "What kind of guidance?" she asked cautiously. Isabella leaned forward slightly. "Well, for instance, I'm struggling with the balance between formal protocol and personal connection during official visits. You've always been masterful at making dignitaries feel welcomed while maintaining appropriate royal dignity, and your work with the Arts Council. I'm taking on some of those responsibilities, but I lack your deep understanding of Aldoria's cultural landscape." Margot found herself genuinely interested for the first time in days. Her work with the arts had always been her passion project, the area where she felt most confident and effective. "The Arts Council can be tricky," she admitted. "There are long-standing personalities and territorial disputes that aren't immediately obvious to newcomers." "Exactly," Isabella exclaimed. "I've been reading all the briefings, but they don't capture the human dynamics that really matter. Would you consider mentoring me through some of these transition challenges?" The request was unexpected and touching. Instead of being pushed aside, Margot was being asked to share her expertise. The feeling was both healing and empowering. "I think I could do that," Margot said slowly. "Perhaps we could start with the upcoming Arts Festival Planning Committee meeting. It's a delicate situation this year because of budget constraints and competing visions for the program." Isabella's face lit up. "That would be wonderful. I've been dreading that meeting because I know how important the festival is to Aldoria's cultural identity." As they continued to talk, Margot found herself sharing insights and strategies she had developed over years of royal service. Isabella listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and taking mental notes. The dynamic felt natural and collaborative rather than competitive. "You know," Margot said after an hour of conversation, "I've been so focused on what I couldn't handle anymore that I forgot about what I could still contribute." Isabella reached across the table and gently touched Margot's hand. "You have so much to offer, Aunt Margot. Not just to me, but to the entire royal family and to Aldoria. Taking time to care for your well-being doesn't diminish your value. It preserves it." The simple statement carried profound impact. Margot had been viewing her need for rest as a failure, a sign of weakness that disqualified her from royal service. Isabella's perspective reframed it as self-care that would ultimately benefit everyone. "The pressure can be overwhelming," Margot admitted quietly. "Some days I wake up feeling like I'm under a microscope, where every move I make will be judged and found wanting." Isabella nodded understandingly. "I feel that too sometimes. But I've learned that perfection isn't the goal. Authentic service is. The people of Aldoria don't need us to be perfect. They need us to care genuinely about their well-being. Margot looked at her daughter-in-law with new appreciation. Behind Isabella's polished public persona was a young woman, grappling with many of the same challenges Margot faced, but approaching them with wisdom beyond her years. Perhaps, Margot said thoughtfully, we could work together on a more formal basis. A partnership where I focus on the areas where I'm strongest, like the Arts Council and cultural initiatives, while you take the lead on diplomatic events and youth outreach. Isabella's smile was radiant. I think that sounds perfect. We could complement each other's strengths and support each other through the challenging aspects. As Isabella prepared to leave for her morning appointments, Margot felt something she hadn't experienced in months: excitement about royal duties. The prospect of collaboration rather than competition, of being valued for her expertise rather than judged for her limitations, had transformed her perspective entirely. Isabella, Margot called as the young woman reached the door. Thank you for seeing possibilities instead of problems. Isabella turned back with a warm smile. Thank you for being willing to share your gifts, Aunt Margot. The royal family is stronger with your involvement. After Isabella left, Margot returned to her window, but this time the garden view looked different. The gardeners were still moving through their routines, but now she saw not just the beauty of their work, but the wisdom of their approach, each person contributing their unique skills to create something greater than any individual effort. For the first time in months, Queen Margot began planning her return to public life, but on her own terms and in partnership with someone who valued her contributions. The path forward was becoming clear. The crisis began at 6:30 a.m. with an urgent phone call to King Edmund's private line. Sir William Hartwell, the palace's chief communications officer, spoke in the clipped tones that indicated serious trouble. Your Majesty, we have a situation. There's been a serious accident at the Westbridge mining facility. Early reports suggest an explosion with multiple casualties. The Prime Minister's office is coordinating the response, but they're requesting immediate royal involvement to help maintain public confidence. Edmund, who had been reviewing morning briefs in his dressing gown, felt his stomach drop. The Westbridge mine employed nearly 3,000 workers and was the economic backbone of the western provinces. An accident there would devastate not just the families directly affected, but entire communities dependent on the mining industry. What do we know about casualties? Edmund asked, already mentally calculating the royal family's response. At least 12 confirmed deaths, Your Majesty, with dozens more injured. The rescue operations are ongoing. The media is already descending on the area, and social media is filled with speculation about safety violations and government oversight failures. Edmund closed his eyes briefly. This was exactly the kind of crisis that required the royal family to provide stability and comfort during national trauma. It demanded presence, empathy, and careful coordination with government officials. I'll need to visit the site, Edmund said, and we'll need to coordinate with the families of the victims. Has anyone contacted Princess Isabella? She's already been briefed, Your Majesty. Her office called 20 minutes ago asking for immediate transportation to Westbridge. She wants to visit the hospital where the injured miners are being treated. Edmund felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. Isabella's instinct to rush toward crisis rather than away from it was admirable, but it also highlighted the complexity of their current family situation. With Queen Margot still transitioning back to public duties, Isabella had become the family's primary crisis responder. Within 2 hours, Edmund found himself in a royal helicopter flying over the Aldorian countryside toward Westbridge, accompanied by Isabella and a small team of security and communication staff. Below them, the landscape shifted from the manicured gardens of the capital to the rugged industrial terrain of the mining region. Isabella sat across from Edmund, reviewing briefing documents and speaking quietly with emergency officials via secure phone. She had changed from her planned outfit for a children's literacy event into a more somber navy suit, appropriate for the gravity of the situation. Her hair was pulled back simply, and she wore minimal jewelry, choices that demonstrated her understanding of crisis protocol without anyone having to instruct her. The hospital reports 43 injured miners, Isabella said, ending her call. 7 are in critical condition. I've arranged for the Royal Medical Fund to cover any treatment costs not covered by the mining company's insurance. Edmund nodded approvingly, Isabella's ability to think beyond immediate gestures to practical support consistently impressed him. What about the families of those killed? I've asked the palace secretary to begin reaching out to each family personally, not for media purposes, but to offer genuine support and to ask what kind of assistance would be most meaningful to them. As their helicopter approached Westbridge, the scale of the disaster became apparent. Emergency vehicles surrounded the mining facility, their lights creating a constellation of urgent activity against the industrial landscape. Smoke still rose from the damaged section of the mine, and Edmund could see rescue workers emerging periodically from the underground tunnels. Their first stop was Westbridge General Hospital, where the injured miners were being treated. Isabella had specifically requested that their visit be kept low-key, with minimal media presence. She wanted the focus to remain on the patients and their families, not on royal photo opportunities. Inside the hospital, Isabella moved with quiet dignity through the corridors, stopping at each bedside to speak personally with injured miners and their families. Edmund watched as she knelt beside the bed of a young man whose arm was heavily bandaged, listening intently as his wife explained how worried they were about missing work during his recovery. "We'll make sure you have the support you need," Isabella assured them. "Your focus should be on healing, not on financial worries." At another bedside, she met with the family of one of the critically injured miners. The man's teenage daughter was crying quietly, and Isabella sat beside her for several minutes, speaking in low tones and offering comfort that went far beyond ceremonial condolences. "She's remarkable in these situations," commented Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the hospital's chief administrator, as she walked with Edmund through the corridor. "Most officials come through, make official statements, and leave. Princess Isabella treats each family as if they're the most important people in the world." Edmund observed his daughter-in-law as she continued her bedside visits, noting how she balanced professional composure with genuine emotional connection. She didn't rush through conversations or offer empty platitudes. Instead, she listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and made specific commitments about follow-up support. When they finally left the hospital after 3 hours of visits, Isabella was quiet during the drive to the mining facility. Edmund could see the emotional toll the conversations had taken on her, but also her determination to see the crisis response through completely. At the mine site, they met with rescue coordinators and mining company executives. Isabella asked detailed questions about safety protocols and what had gone wrong, demonstrating that her concern extended beyond immediate comfort to preventing future tragedies. "Your Highness," said James Morrison, the mining company's safety director, "I want you to know that we take full responsibility for this accident. Our preliminary investigation suggests equipment failure that should have been prevented by more frequent inspections." Isabella's response was measured but firm. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Morrison. The families affected by this tragedy deserve transparency and accountability. What specific changes will you implement to ensure this doesn't happen again?" The conversation that followed was technical and detailed, covering everything from equipment maintenance schedules to worker safety training programs. Edmund was struck by Isabella's ability to ask informed questions without appearing to attack or blame. As evening approached, they made their final stop at the community center that had been converted into a family support area. Here, relatives of both injured and deceased miners had gathered, many of them still waiting for news about their loved ones. Isabella spent over an hour in the center, moving from family to family, offering condolences, gathering contact information for follow-up support, and listening to stories about the miners who had been lost. When a young widow broke down crying while describing her husband's dedication to his job, Isabella didn't hesitate to embrace her, holding her until the tears subsided. During the helicopter flight back to the capital, Isabella was unusually quiet, staring out at the darkening landscape below. Finally, she spoke. "Uncle Edmund, I keep thinking about that young woman whose husband died. She's pregnant with their second child, and she's terrified about how she'll manage financially. We need to do more than just offer condolences." Edmund studied her face, seeing not just compassion but determination. "What do you have in mind?" "I want to establish a comprehensive support fund for mining families, not just for this accident, but as an ongoing resource for the industry. And I think we need to push for stronger safety regulations, even if it means challenging powerful mining interests." The proposal was ambitious and potentially controversial, but Edmund recognized the wisdom in it. Isabella wasn't content with symbolic gestures. She wanted systemic change that would prevent future tragedies. That will require careful coordination with the government and significant fundraising, Edmund warned. Isabella nodded. I know, but if we don't use moments like this to create meaningful change, then we're failing in our duty to protect the people of Aldoria. As they approached the palace, Edmund reflected on the day's events. The crisis had tested Isabella in ways that formal state dinners and ceremonial events never could, and she had proven herself capable of leadership that was both compassionate and practical. The real test, however, would be whether she could sustain this level of engagement while managing her other royal responsibilities. The demands of crisis leadership were becoming a regular part of her role, and Edmund knew they needed to have serious conversations about the long-term structure of royal duties. 2 weeks after the Westbridge mining disaster, King Edmund found himself facing a decision that would reshape the Aldorian monarchy for generations to come. The success of Isabella's crisis leadership had not gone unnoticed by the government, the media, or the people themselves. Overnight, she had transformed from a supporting royal figure to an indispensable leader whose presence was actively requested by various institutions across the kingdom. Edmund sat in his private study, surrounded by briefing papers that painted a clear picture of the royal family's evolving dynamics. Public approval ratings showed Isabella at an unprecedented 87%, higher than any royal family member in Aldorian history. More significantly, requests for her involvement in official functions had increased by 300%. In the past month alone, the documents before him included formal requests from the Parliament for Isabella to address the upcoming session on workplace safety reform, invitations from 12 different charitable organizations asking her to serve as patron, and a proposal from the Foreign Ministry for her to lead a trade delegation to 3 neighboring countries. A soft knock interrupted his contemplation. "Come in," he called, expecting his secretary with the afternoon's correspondence. Instead, Prince Alexander entered, his expression serious but determined. "Father, we need to discuss Isabella's role in the family." Edmund gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I was just reviewing the same issue. Your wife has become rather popular." Alexander settled into his chair with a slight smile. "That's an understatement. Yesterday, I attended a university graduation ceremony in the northern provinces. The students spent more time asking about Isabella's mining safety initiatives than they did about my remarks on economic development." "And how do you feel about that?" Edmund asked carefully. The dynamics between royal spouses could be delicate, especially when one achieved greater prominence than the other. Alexander's response surprised him with its maturity and thoughtfulness. "I feel proud, Father. Isabella has found her calling in a way that I'm still working toward. She has an instinct for public service that makes her genuinely effective, not just ceremonially present." Edmund studied his son's face, looking for any trace of resentment or concern. Instead, he saw genuine admiration and a security in his own role that spoke well of both Alexander's character and his marriage. "The question," Alexander continued, "is whether we're structuring her responsibilities in a way that maximizes her effectiveness while maintaining family balance." "What do you mean?" Alexander leaned forward. "Isabella is currently handling the duties of 3 different royal roles. Her own as my wife, significant portions of what would normally be Queen Margot's responsibilities, and an increasingly large share of crisis response and public engagement. It's not sustainable long-term." Edmund nodded grimly. The same concern had been weighing on his mind. Isabella's dedication was admirable, but he had watched her schedule become increasingly demanding without a corresponding adjustment in support or official recognition. "I've been thinking about creating a new formal position," Edmund admitted, "something like Principal Royal Representative for Public Welfare. It would give Isabella official standing to lead on issues like workplace safety, healthcare reform, and social services." Alexander's eyes lit up. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd consider. Isabella mentioned yesterday that she's been frustrated by having to work around protocol limitations when she wants to advocate for policy changes. There would be constitutional implications," Edmund warned. "We'd need Parliament's approval for any formal expansion of royal duties, and there are those who might view it as overreach. Or, Alexander countered, they might view it as responsive adaptation to public needs. Isabella's mining safety fund has already raised over £2 million in private donations. Her hospital visits program has reduced patient complaint rates by 30% in participating facilities. These aren't ceremonial achievements. They're measurable improvements in people's lives. Edmund was impressed by his son's command of the details. Alexander had clearly been paying close attention to Isabella's work and its impact. What about Queen Margot's feelings on this? Edmund asked. I know she and Isabella have been working together more closely, but officially elevating Isabella's role might be seen as diminishing hers. Alexander smiled. Actually, that's the other thing I wanted to discuss. I had lunch with both Isabella and Aunt Margot yesterday, and they've been developing ideas for a collaborative approach. Tell me more. They want to formalize their partnership. Margot would focus on cultural affairs, arts promotion, and historical preservation, areas where her expertise and passion are strongest. Isabella would handle social welfare, crisis response, and international relations. Rather than competing roles, they'd be complementary specializations. The proposal was elegant in its simplicity and politically astute. Instead of creating tension between the two women, it would formalize their different strengths and interests. And Margot is comfortable with this arrangement? More than comfortable, Alexander replied. She told me yesterday that working with Isabella has reminded her why she fell in love with royal service in the first place. She's excited about having a defined area of expertise rather than feeling pressure to be competent in every aspect of royal duty. Edmund felt a wave of relief. One of his greatest concerns had been managing the family dynamics around Isabella's rising prominence. If Margot was genuinely supportive rather than threatened, it opened possibilities he hadn't dared consider. There's one more thing, Father, Alexander said, his tone becoming more serious. Isabella wants to discuss international responsibilities with you directly. She's received invitations from 4 different countries asking her to lead cultural or humanitarian missions. Edmund raised an eyebrow. International representation was typically reserved for the monarch or the heir apparent. For Isabella to receive such direct invitations indicated a level of international recognition that was both impressive and potentially sensitive. Which countries? Novaria, obviously, following her success with their delegation, but also Valdoria, the Eastland Republic, and surprisingly, the Imperial Federation of Karelia. Edmund whistled softly. Karelia was Aldoria's most important trading partner and had historically been quite formal about diplomatic protocol. For them to directly invite a princess rather than working through traditional channels suggested they viewed Isabella as having significant influence. I think, Edmund said slowly, it's time for a formal family meeting to discuss these changes. We need to make decisions that serve both the kingdom's needs and our family's well-being. Alexander nodded. Isabella suggested the same thing. She's prepared a presentation on her vision for expanded royal engagement, including detailed proposals for new programs and partnerships. Of course she has, Edmund said with fond exasperation. Isabella's thoroughness continued to amaze him. That evening, as Edmund reviewed the day's conversations, he realized they were approaching a historic moment for the Aldorian monarchy. Isabella's emergence as a dynamic public figure wasn't just a temporary response to current circumstances. It represented a fundamental evolution in how the royal family could serve the kingdom. The traditional model of ceremonial duties and symbolic presence was giving way to something more active and engaged. Isabella had demonstrated that royal influence could translate into measurable improvements in people's lives, but capitalizing on that potential would require structural changes that went beyond informal arrangements. Edmund found himself energized by the possibilities, but also mindful of the challenges. Expanding Isabella's role would require careful navigation of constitutional requirements, parliamentary approval, and public opinion. It would also require ensuring that Alexander's eventual succession to the throne wasn't overshadowed by his wife's current prominence. As he prepared for bed, Edmund reflected on how dramatically his perspective on the monarchy had changed in recent months. What had begun as a crisis management strategy had evolved into an opportunity for modernization and renewal. Isabella hadn't just filled gaps in royal duties, she had reimagined what those duties could accomplish. The decisions ahead would shape not just the royal family's structure, but its relevance and effectiveness for decades to come. Edmund felt the weight of that responsibility, but also a confidence he hadn't experienced in years. With Isabella's vision and energy, combined with the family's collective wisdom and experience, the Aldorian monarchy could enter a new era of meaningful public service. The challenge now was translating that potential into concrete changes that would benefit both the kingdom and the royal family itself. The family meeting took place on a crisp autumn morning in the palace's private family room, a space deliberately chosen for its informal atmosphere and personal significance. Unlike the grand staterooms where official business was conducted, this room held decades of family memories, birthday celebrations, holiday gatherings, and quiet conversations that had shaped the royal family's private relationships. Queen Margot arrived first, carrying a leather portfolio that Edmund recognized as the one she had used during her art gallery days. She looked more relaxed than she had in months, wearing a comfortable burgundy sweater rather than formal attire, and her smile held a warmth that had been absent during her period of withdrawal. Princess Isabella entered shortly after, followed by Prince Alexander. Isabella carried her own detailed notes, but what struck Edmund most was the easy camaraderie between the two women. They moved naturally together, clearly comfortable with their developing partnership. "Before we begin discussing specifics," Edmund said once everyone was settled, "I want to acknowledge how much our family dynamic has evolved over the past few months. What started as a challenging period has become an opportunity for positive change." Margot nodded, looking directly at Isabella. "I want to start by thanking Isabella for her patience and wisdom during my adjustment period. She could have seen my struggles as an opportunity to advance her own position, but instead she reached out with genuine support and collaboration." Isabella's response was immediate and heartfelt. "Aunt Margot, your experience and insights have been invaluable to me. I hope we can continue working together, because I genuinely believe we accomplish more as partners than either of us could alone." Edmund felt a deep satisfaction at witnessing this exchange. The potential for rivalry or resentment had been transformed into mutual respect and shared purpose. "I've spent considerable time thinking about my role going forward," Margot continued, opening her portfolio. "I've realized that my happiest and most effective moments as queen have been when I was working in areas that genuinely excited me: cultural preservation, arts education, and historical research." She pulled out several documents and photographs. "I'd like to propose formally restructuring my responsibilities around these passions. Instead of trying to maintain a broad range of duties that drain my energy, I want to focus intensively on areas where I can make meaningful contributions." Alexander leaned forward with interest. "What specific changes are you envisioning?" Margot's enthusiasm was evident as she spread out her materials. "I want to establish the Aldorian Cultural Heritage Foundation, which would preserve traditional crafts, support emerging artists, and document our kingdom's cultural history. I've already identified several initiatives that are struggling for lack of royal patronage and coordination." Edmund studied the proposals, impressed by their thoroughness and vision. "This would be a significant undertaking. You're talking about creating an entirely new institutional framework." "Exactly," Margot replied. "Rather than spreading myself thin across multiple ceremonial duties, I want to build something lasting that reflects my genuine expertise and passion." Isabella spoke up. "I think it's brilliant, Aunt Margot, and it would complement perfectly with what I'd like to propose for my own expanded role." She opened her own folder, revealing detailed charts and policy proposals. "I've been analyzing the areas where royal involvement has the greatest potential for practical impact: workplace safety, healthcare accessibility, education reform, and social services coordination." Edmund examined Isabella's materials, noting their professional quality and comprehensive scope. "These look like government policy papers." "In a way they are," Isabella admitted. "I've been working with policy experts to understand where royal influence can genuinely improve people's lives, rather than just providing symbolic support." Alexander smiled proudly. Isabella has been collaborating with university researchers, consulting with international development experts, and analyzing data from every royal initiative of the past decade. "The goal," Isabella continued, "is to transform royal duties from ceremonial appearances into strategic interventions that address real social challenges. For example, instead of just visiting hospitals, I want to establish programs that improve patient outcomes and healthcare worker satisfaction. Edmund was struck by the sophistication of her approach. You're proposing to professionalize royal service in a way we've never attempted before. Yes, Isabella replied confidently. I believe the monarchy's relevance in the 21st century depends on our ability to demonstrate measurable positive impact, not just traditional pageantry. Margot looked at Isabella with admiration. Your approach is exactly what the younger generation expects from their institutions: accountability, effectiveness, and genuine engagement with contemporary challenges. And your cultural work, Isabella responded, provides the historical foundation and artistic inspiration that gives those contemporary efforts depth and meaning. We need both innovation and tradition. Edmund felt a surge of pride at witnessing this collaborative vision. Instead of competing for limited royal influence, Margot and Isabella had developed a comprehensive approach that maximized both their individual strengths and their collective impact. There are practical considerations, Edmund noted. Parliamentary approval for expanded royal duties, budget allocations for new initiatives, and coordination with existing government programs. Alexander had clearly anticipated this concern. I've had preliminary conversations with the Prime Minister's office. There's strong support for increased royal engagement in social welfare, especially given Isabella's track record with the Mining Safety Initiative. And the Cultural Foundation idea? Edmund asked. The Minister of Culture is extremely enthusiastic, Margot replied. She's been looking for ways to elevate Aldoria's international cultural profile, and royal leadership would provide exactly the visibility and credibility needed. Edmund realized they had moved far beyond theoretical discussions into concrete planning for implementable changes. What about the constitutional implications of these expanded roles? Isabella had clearly researched this thoroughly. I've consulted with constitutional scholars. As long as we're careful to support rather than override elected government policies, expanded royal engagement in social welfare falls within established precedents. The key, Alexander added, is framing these initiatives as royal leadership in civil society, rather than political intervention. Isabella would be advocating for better outcomes, not specific government policies. Edmund stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where this family journey had begun months earlier. The changes they were discussing would fundamentally alter the Aldorian monarchy's structure and purpose. I want to be absolutely clear about something, he said, turning back to face his family. These proposals represent the most significant evolution in royal duties in our kingdom's modern history. We're not just adjusting to temporary circumstances. We're establishing a new model for how the monarchy serves Aldoria. Is that a concern for you, Father? Alexander asked. Edmund smiled slowly. On the contrary, it's exactly what I've been hoping for. The monarchy's survival depends on its ability to remain relevant and valuable to the people we serve. What you're proposing achieves that goal better than anything I could have imagined. Margot leaned forward. So we have your support for formalizing these new roles? You have my enthusiastic support, Edmund replied. But more than that, you have my confidence that this family is prepared to lead Aldoria into a new era of effective royal service. Isabella looked around the room at each family member. Then I think we're ready to begin the next chapter of our service to the kingdom. As the meeting concluded, Edmund reflected on how dramatically their family situation had transformed. What had begun as a crisis of confidence and role definition had evolved into a comprehensive vision for modernized monarchy that honored tradition while embracing innovation. The path ahead would require careful implementation and ongoing adjustment, but the foundation of mutual respect, shared purpose, and complementary strengths provided a solid basis for success. The Aldorian royal family was ready to demonstrate that monarchy could be both timeless and timely, both respectful of heritage and responsive to contemporary needs. 6 months later, King Edmund stood on the balcony of Aldoria Palace watching the most successful state celebration in the kingdom's recent history unfold in the courtyard below. The annual Unity Day festival had been transformed from a traditional ceremonial event into a vibrant showcase of Aldorian culture and achievement, reflecting the royal family's new approach to public service. Below him, Queen Margot moved gracefully through the artisan booths she had personally helped establish. speaking animatedly with craftspeople whose work was being featured in the Eldorian Cultural Heritage Foundation's first major exhibition. Her face glowed with genuine enthusiasm as she examined a traditional weaving technique that her foundation had helped preserve through documentation and apprenticeship programs. On the other side of the courtyard, Princess Isabella was surrounded by a group of young healthcare workers who were participating in the Royal Healthcare Innovation Initiative, one of several programs launched under her new official title as Principal Royal Representative for Social Development. The title, approved unanimously by Parliament 3 months earlier, had formalized her role and provided the institutional framework for her expanding influence. "The transformation is remarkable," commented Sir William Hartwell, the palace communications director, as he joined Edmund on the balcony. "Public approval ratings for the royal family are at historic highs, and more importantly, we're seeing measurable improvements in the programs Princess Isabella champions." Edmund nodded, studying the scene below with deep satisfaction. "What are the latest statistics from the healthcare initiative?" "Patient satisfaction scores have improved by 40% in participating hospitals, and staff retention rates are up 35%. The mining safety program has achieved 0 serious accidents across all participating facilities for 4 consecutive months." The numbers were impressive, but what struck Edmund most was the energy and enthusiasm visible throughout the celebration. People weren't just attending a royal event. They were participating in a demonstration of their kingdom's progress and potential. Prince Alexander appeared beside them, having just completed his own circuit through the festival. Isabella's presentation on education reform drew the largest crowd we've ever had for a Unity Day speech, he reported. "The University Partnership Program has a waiting list of schools wanting to participate." Edmund smiled at his son's obvious pride. Alexander had found his own stride in the family's new structure, focusing on economic development and international trade relationships that complemented Isabella's social programs perfectly. Rather than competing for attention, the two had developed a dynamic partnership that maximized their different strengths. "And how is Queen Margot's cultural foundation being received?" Edmund asked. "Beyond all expectations," Alexander replied. "The international art community is taking serious notice. We've received requests from 3 different countries asking for cultural exchange programs based on the foundation's model." From the courtyard below, the sound of applause drew their attention back to the festivities. Isabella had concluded her remarks and was now moving through the crowd, stopping to speak personally with program participants and community leaders. Even from a distance, Edmund could see her genuine engagement with each conversation. "She never treats these interactions as ceremonial obligations," Sir William observed. "Every conversation appears to matter to her personally." It was true. Isabella had maintained the authentic connection with people that had first distinguished her during the mining crisis. Despite her expanded responsibilities and official recognition, she approached each public engagement with the same genuine care and attention that had won over the Eldorian people. Queen Margot appeared at the base of the palace steps, waving up at them with obvious happiness. She had just finished giving a tour of the new Cultural Museum wing to a group of international visitors, and her satisfaction was evident in her posture and expression. "She looks like herself again," Edmund said quietly. "The past few months have reminded me of the confident, passionate woman I married." "The specialized focus has been transformative for her," Alexander agreed. "She told me yesterday that she feels more professionally fulfilled now than at any point since becoming queen." As the afternoon progressed, Edmund made his own appearances throughout the festival, but he found himself most drawn to observing the seamless collaboration between his family members. Margot and Isabella moved naturally between each other's areas, offering support and expertise without territorial competition. Alexander served as an effective bridge between traditional royal duties and the innovative programs his wife championed. The evening's formal dinner brought together government officials, international visitors, and community leaders who had participated in the day's celebrations. As Edmund looked around the dining hall, he was struck by the diversity of the gathering. Not just the usual diplomatic and political figures, but healthcare workers, teachers, artists, and social advocates who were actively involved in the royal family's various initiatives. During the dinner, Prime Minister Margaret Thornton approached Edmund with obvious enthusiasm. "Your Majesty, I wanted to personally thank you for the royal family's expanded engagement with social policy." Princess Isabella's programs are achieving results that our government agencies have struggled with for years. What specifically has impressed you most? Edmund asked. The collaborative approach, the Prime Minister replied. Instead of working around government programs or duplicating efforts, she's found ways to enhance and amplify what we're already trying to accomplish. It's partnership rather than competition. Edmund felt a deep sense of validation. One of his concerns about expanding royal duties had been the potential for overstepping constitutional boundaries or conflicting with elected officials' responsibilities. Isabella's success in navigating these complexities demonstrated her sophisticated understanding of both royal limitations and opportunities. Later that evening, as the family gathered in their private sitting room for their traditional post-event reflection, Edmund felt compelled to acknowledge how far they had come. When we first discussed restructuring our roles 6 months ago, he began, I hoped we might find a way to serve Aldoria more effectively. What you've accomplished has exceeded my most optimistic expectations. Isabella, who was reviewing notes from the day's conversations, looked up with a modest smile. It's been possible because we've worked as a team, Uncle Edmund. Every program's success has depended on collaboration, not just within our family, but with government officials, community leaders, and the people we're trying to serve. Margot, who was examining photographs from the day's cultural exhibitions, added, What I've learned is that royal influence is most powerful when it's used to support and amplify other people's expertise rather than trying to lead from a position of assumed authority. Alexander nodded in agreement. The key has been finding ways to add value rather than just adding presence. People respond positively because they can see concrete benefits from royal involvement. Edmund realized they had discovered something profound about modern monarchy. Its relevance depended not on traditional ceremony or inherited authority, but on demonstrable service that improved people's lives. The Aldorian royal family had evolved from symbolic figures to effective advocates and coordinators for social progress. Looking ahead, Edmund said, What are your priorities for the coming year? Isabella's eyes lit up with plans already in motion. I want to expand the healthcare initiative internationally, sharing successful models with other kingdoms and learning from their innovations. And I'm working with universities to develop research programs that will provide ongoing evidence for best practices in social welfare. The Cultural Foundation is ready to launch its first international exhibition tour, Margot added. We've also received requests to consult on cultural preservation projects in 4 different countries. Alexander smiled. And I'll be supporting both initiatives while developing trade relationships that can fund and sustain these programs long-term. As the family continued discussing their plans, Edmund felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey they had traveled together. What had begun as a period of uncertainty and challenge had evolved into the most fulfilling and effective era of his reign. The Aldorian monarchy had found its modern purpose, not as distant figures performing ancient rituals, but as dedicated public servants using their unique position to coordinate, advocate, and inspire meaningful improvements in their kingdom and beyond. The future looked brighter than it had in years, built on a foundation of mutual respect, collaborative vision, and unwavering commitment to service. Standing at his window later that night, Edmund looked out over the kingdom he had served for so many years, feeling confident that the monarchy would continue to evolve and thrive in the capable hands of the remarkable family that surrounded him.